I'm here with Marvin Belzer of the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center. Marvin is a professor at UCLA in their Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences. He's a former professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University. Marvin teaches mindfulness at UCLA and in other venues. And of special interest today, he's the originator of a hot seat activity that he uses in his classes. It's a practice to help you develop social mindfulness, or what's known as relational mindfulness. Marvin, thank you so much for being with me today. I'm really glad to be able to speak with you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Well, let's start off by having you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got interested in mindfulness, and how you got interested in relational mindfulness in particular.
Yeah. Well, I got interested in meditation generally when I was a philosophy graduate student back in the 80s. And I was fortunate to kind of get some good guidance, even at that time when there wasn't a lot of resources compared to now. And so even as I was finishing my dissertation and so forth, I developed a serious interest in meditation and did some long retreats, spent time in Burma, Myanmar, and so forth. So there were a number of years where my academic career and my meditation interest were separate. You know, meditation was more, in a way, it was like an extreme sport. You know, I liked it. I found it interesting and helpful, and I had the opportunity to go off and do long retreats and so forth. And then when I was at Bowling Green in the 90s, I began teaching an undergraduate course in meditation, Philosophy 339, Mindfulness, Practice and Theory. And there are other things I could say about that process, but even in the late 90s, there was quite a lot of interest in that course. And then about 2004, I will talk about this more later probably, but I met some people who were doing some relational practices, which I realized could be adapted for the mindfulness setting, where we actually pay attention to another person in this kind of in the same spirit with which we pay attention to ourselves in meditation. And so that was kind of my step. And then I also realized that with college students, you know, some of them are interested in meditation, others not. I don't know who is and who really isn't, you know, but it occurred to me that the kind of the interactive aspects of the kind of relational mindfulness might be even better for some of them, given where they were in their lives. And I think that's still a conjecture that I think is true, but it could be researched.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue to my next question, which as a prelude to talking more about relational mindfulness, how we can develop that. What is mindfulness and meditation for, you know, for those who are unfamiliar or could use a refresher?
Yeah. Briefly, mindfulness is a capacity we have, first of all. So it's not something esoteric that we have to try to figure out and then create and hold on to. It's the ability to know what's happening in our experience moment by moment, you know, and then it can be cultivated. And so even though it's a natural capacity that we don't have to figure out, nonetheless, we can refine this spirit of taking an interest, being curious, being non-judgmental about what's actually happening in our experience. And by that, again, it's not a complicated thing. It's just what we can hear and see, taste, feel, our thoughts, emotions, and so forth.
Living in the moment, is that?
Yeah, but even that can be, I'm a philosopher, so I'm not a big fan of living in the moment, because moments go by pretty fast and are continually changing. And so there can be this sort of preoccupation with being in the moment in a way that no, we don't even have to try that hard, right? It's much more connecting with things that are happening in our actual experience, even as things change and so forth. So in terms of the meditation, again, briefly, I like to break it into two parts. It's just one model for thinking about it.
Yeah.
First is we use our ability to direct our attention. And we do it in a sort of weird way because we ask ourselves to pay attention to stuff that's happening that doesn't need to be paid attention to. So something actually happening, such as ambient sounds, sensations in our bodies, the feel of the breath, something relatively neutral, not kind of pulling our attention. And there is something about this activity of our minds where we focus on something like the feel of the breath, just the normal sensations, sustain the attention there for a while. It's remarkable what can happen. And most forms of meditation, even though there are dozens of types, most begin one way or another in this way, directing attention, not necessarily to the breath, but to a mantra or something else that's relatively neutral. And it's deepening concentration and creating more stability, clarity, and so forth. And so this is remarkably simple and remarkably doable. I mean, if I have a skill, I think it's this ability to make this clear that this is really something ordinary people can do, and so forth. And we don't have to do something impossible in order to start, such as clear our minds. A big misconception.
We don't have to clear our minds to do meditation.
No, we do not. This is maybe my biggest pet peeve. It's partly because so many people hear about mindfulness. There's a lot of interest these days. And in my experience, people are coming to my classes, both college students and older students, who have that misconception that they've tried meditation before. Somewhere they got the idea that they need to clear their mind if they're doing it right.
Yeah.
They cannot clear their mind by just deciding to. After 30 some years of meditation, neither can I. And we don't have to, right? The misconception gets a foothold because there can be times where the mind is settling and becoming calmer, where there aren't a lot of thoughts. And that can be interesting. And then that shifts also. So we don't have to start there, and we don't have to try to make it happen. And we certainly don't have to try to hold on to it during those times when it does happen, even though it can. So that's the first part. We focus attention in this doable way. And then, even though it is doable and relatively simple, we're going to fail. Our attention will drift. Quite naturally, something will pull our attention away. And it's not really a failure of the meditation. It's just a failure of being able to stay focused on what we decided to try to stay focused on.
Yes.
And it's great to normalize this. It's part of human intelligence that our attention moves to what needs to be paid attention to. And so even when we're trying to stay with the breath, a thought will come to mind, and another thought, it'll pull our attention, and then time will go by. And so it's perfectly normal and to be expected. And what we do in mindfulness practice is we include in the meditation whatever it is. There's just this permission just to be real. And this is where whatever comes into consciousness, we include as part of the meditation. And I won't go on more now so much, but like even things like physical pain, when it's pain that intrudes, we gently include it. Just what does it actually feel like? And this can be counterintuitive, and then gently come back to that home base of the breath or where we were focusing. Likewise with emotions, so we don't have to micromanage our experience or make something different. It's just this permission to notice, to include, but always with the permission to come back. So I like the model of a pendulum. We focus somewhere, we try to keep the attention there. Quite naturally, we get pulled away. Whatever it is, gently come back. Sometimes we're doing sort of both at once, so it's not either or necessarily. But anyway, that's my best way, I think, of explaining what mindfulness meditation is and how straightforward it is. It's actually surprisingly simple, and it's not a conceptually complicated activity.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so then tell us about this hot seat activity and how it relates to relational mindfulness,
Yeah.
what it is, how it works.
Yeah. So the hot seat as a relational mindfulness practice, I started leading on a teen retreat in 2004 after learning a similar exercise from Nicole Dedone, who I was visiting in San Francisco. I met her, very interesting teacher around intimacy and sexuality. And she was leading a hot seat exercise, and she called it the hot seat, and we learned it from others. And there was something of an agenda. I would say the difference between what she was doing and what I began to facilitate was in the context in which she led them or was part of them in her group. There definitely was a sort of agenda to help people open up, to become more aware of their sexual desires or what they want around intimacy and so forth. And fantastic. It was a very interesting experience. But I realized that the same sort of exercise could be done in a context where there wasn't any agenda other than paying attention to each other and taking that opportunity in a way to change the social rules so that it's not an ordinary discussion and so forth, but there is that way of practicing where instead of focusing on the breath or on my own experience, I'm focusing on another person. And kind of where in the type of meditation I just described, we would intentionally try to keep the attention focused on the breath or our feet or whatever has presented itself. We also could do a similar sort of thing where the attention is on another person. And so get to the hot seat more in a second, but with relational mindfulness generally, that's the way I would characterize it, as setting up a container so that people can interact in ways that help facilitate becoming more familiar with what it's like simply to pay attention to another person and to be paid attention to by one person or more. And so obviously this is not something brand new, and so forth, but it is something like the type of meditation I just described. Western mindfulness teachers certainly didn't make that up. I mean, this type of meditation I described is more or less what I learned from Buddhist monks in Burma, Myanmar, Sayadaw U Pandita, and so forth. So, what is kind of being taught as mindfulness meditation definitely has direct roots to Theravadan Buddhism and other forms of Buddhism, even though, of course, many different traditions and cultures and religions have practices that are analogous. So there's so much to explore.
Yes.
Likewise, there's no claim that we needed kind of Western mindfulness teachers to figure out how to set up practices for people to pay attention to each other. But there isn't that straightforward lineage that in the same way that there is with the meditation, and so forth. And so where the hot seat came in and where I did innovate from how Nicole was leading it was, well, look, so let me just describe the structure and then describe how it differs. So the idea is it's a group activity, 7, 8, 10, 12 people is pretty good for it. And if, this is a big if someone wants to volunteer, and I am a huge advocate of non-coercion.
No coercion,
but if someone wants to volunteer, then a very simple activity, there'd be a facilitator. We'd all place our attention on the person who volunteered. And then there's a simple form for asking them any question we want. And the form is simply, if you're sitting there taking the person in, if a question occurs to you, you raise your hand, the facilitator calls your name, one question. It's good if it's a kind of a simple, straightforward question, not with lots of parts, but any question is okay. And in this activity, the person who they volunteered to be in the hot seat, but they don't have to answer every question, so they can pass or just be silent. And then the person who asked the question ends the interaction with a thank you, no other comment,
Mm-hmm.
and no follow-up question unless they're recognized again. So they might well have a follow-up question and they might well be recognized again, but this simple form seems to be actually quite useful for this. And then in terms of the, that we certainly agree to confidentiality, which is super important. And even a sort of level of confidentiality where we wouldn't we would be careful about jumping into the topic with the person after the hot seat is over. It might be okay, but it might, so we kind of check in. Would you like to talk about, we have a common interest, or I was just curious, and kind of emphasizing this so that the person who is in the hot seat has a freedom to say, no, that was just for that. I don't want to go into it further. So,
yeah.
And then in terms of the guidance around questions, first, any question is okay, period.
Yeah.
If there is a guidance, it would be to keep the attention on the person and go with curiosity and not bring yourself in so much, right? So, and so, but we learn by experience, and we don't need to be uptight about it, and so forth. And I have probably facilitated about 1,000 of these since 2004 in a context where it was a relational mindfulness activity, often in conjunction with the undergraduate mindfulness course that I have been teaching at Bowling Green and now at UCLA, or on young adult teen types of retreats and so forth. And they continue to be, for me, they're beautiful. They're very interesting. And of course, where they have this level of interest is twofold, I would say. First, for me personally, and I'm sure for many others, but not necessarily for everyone, it genuinely is like a meditation.
Yes.
My own meditation experience kicks in because I have done a lot of meditation on my own. And but that permission just to gaze at someone, to kind of hold the visual gaze on them, it does definitely function for me as a sort of neutral home base. Even if I begin a hot seat session where I have some degree of attraction or aversion to the person, that tends to melt very quickly for me. So I'm just so they function as this sort of neutral home base for this, and very analogous to the sensations connected with the breath in terms of the process.
And do you think there could even be people for whom another person as an object of attention or what have you? It could be a better object than the breath?
That's a fantastic conjecture. I would conjecture, but I think that's a good dissertation topic, dude. No, seriously, it would be a great research project, in my opinion, and I don't think it's been done. Anecdotally, I would say that I have had many students. I've read many journals, I'm sure I've had students for whom the really significant part of the course was the relational practice rather than the meditation. So that's something that being said, it's certainly different experience for me from meditation, but there are things that are, it has a certain comfort, even when I'm facilitating, which normally I am, and so forth. But the second thing is, whether or not it's like a meditation, it tends to be utterly riveting. And just it's like an example would be, and it's interesting with college students, it can take some time for them to get used to it, or to appreciate how open and free a space it is. Start with, from my perspective, pretty boring questions like, why'd you come to UCLA? But I'm not judging. I am judging, but you know what I mean? It's like, it has its own life, and I do participate, but I don't try to make something happen. But almost always what does happen is, at some point, someone will ask a question, which is pretty kind of like, what did you do today? I got up, I worked on a paper, I had lunch with my girlfriend, we had a little fight, I went to the rec center and worked out, and then I came here. Thank you. So I just made that up, and I did put something in there, but that's the sort of thing that happens with just like, what did you do today? Or just very ordinary questions. People will, I mean, that's a good example of what does happen. And of course, I put something in there about this little fight,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
all of us are going to be like, what?
What happened there?
Exactly.
Yes, yes.
And so it's just beautiful where a group will, they'll still try to be polite, you know? And so it's just like, oh, what's your paper about?
Right.
And then no one gives a damn about what the paper's about, you know, or someone might. So
Yes,
you just let it unfold. But the point is, someone at some point almost always will have the courage to ask a question, which is perfectly appropriate. The guy wasn't hiding it. It's what we're curious about. So going with curiosity is just like, well, what was the fight about?
Yeah.
Whatever the answer, it's like, so we're in a territory of sharing with each other as human beings.
Yes.
Below the level of what's normal.
Yes.
And so, for instance, if he says, yeah, we were fighting because she's been flirting with my best friend. Thank you. And then it's just like energy in the room is just like crazy, because we've established a safe container for paying attention to each other. And suddenly we're in a context where we can actually talk with someone about jealousy, you know, and so forth. And it's in a context where he didn't have to say everything he did that day, right? So he could have left that out,
right?
And he didn't. And it's just like, think how odd it would be if in the context of this activity, if he had mentioned that and then no one had even followed up, right?
Right.
The polite thing to do is go with curiosity in this activity, and that opens up a lot, you know. And so that's an example of that just gives the flavor. And of course there are groups where not a lot, but there are groups where at the end I'm just like, damn, they didn't show up, they didn't really, they ignored, they didn't go with curiosity, they just remained polite, and it like practicing for a law school interview, you know, or something. But those are rare. Most often it's deeply satisfying just at that level of having a space to be just as real with other people as we are with ourselves in meditation. And so the thing, if we were doing a meditation together, that kid probably would be completely obsessed with the fight, right? I mean, it's like he might be able to feel his breath or feel his feet or blah, blah, blah. But the thing that's going to be coming to mind probably is the fight and what to do and what not to do and so forth. So to have a space where, you know, it is a container, probably should say more about it. I don't ever facilitate a hot seat where the assumption is that everyone will volunteer. So this is tricky, like in a class or on a retreat. If I'm leading a small group, though, I will say, well, there's this activity. I kind of want to get the group to buy in to it also. And it's not necessarily everyone's cup of tea, you know, so just making it clear that even if everybody else volunteers, there's not the assumption that you will do it. So that can be a little bit tricky, and then the confidentiality part, I haven't been in a situation where I facilitated hot seats in high schools. I'm not sure I would want to, because I would not be confident that they would really get the confidentiality piece well enough.
That part is important.
Yeah, it is. And but not coercion, the importance of confidentiality, and then kind of just the assumption, which bears examination, and this sort of thing I feel should be researched more. It hasn't been, but you know, it's like there is a certain courage that's a part of being even being in a group like this, because it's the same sort of courage that it takes to meditate, to be willing to be real.
Yes.
And then that's where the non-coercion is really important. So it's actually, there's no coercion around volunteering. There's also no coercion around asking a question. So I make these things crystal clear. So just like you may have habits of jumping in and so forth, but you may find that you're just just being there. And yeah.
Now, how does this translate into day-to-day life? What does relational mindfulness look like in day-to-day life?
Yeah, I don't know. Fantastic question. It's to be determined. It's to be, there is so much, Adrian, that is to, in my opinion, that could be explored here. And so there's a UCLA graduate, Giselle Jones, she's in Toronto now. She has been using relational mindfulness in her work with couples. And so she does couples counseling. And I don't know exactly what she's doing. Whenever I have her come and visit for classes or different workshops, and I'm always on the edge of, give us some juicy examples of how it worked, you know. But I think that it's kind of obvious to me that, at least that, you know, if a couple has come to a counselor, there's some issue, right? And the issue in one way or another is related to having lost something that they once had. And almost certainly it's, I'm not an expert on any of this, but almost certainly it's kind of falling into some patterns with each other. That aren't working well. And how to get out of those roles. Well, one way is to set up a context where they can actually pay attention,
increased attention,
just in a simple way, without, you know, with a sort of permission to make mistakes, and not, we might say things here that we regret, blah, blah. So you can see I'm excited, but I'm not an expert on this, but I used to kind of feel like it's probably not an activity for families, right? You know, given the complexities of families, extended families, it's, you know, just like, okay, let's just play our roles and get along well. But a few years before my father passed away, ended up, you know, had some older nieces and nephews, and we ended up doing a hot seat with him, which was just extraordinary, you know. Just, and it was clear it wasn't for everyone in the family, but we set it up so that, you know, it was a rather large family gathering. And so we had you know, it was just, I let people know it was happening, and it was beautiful just to have a space where the attention was on him, and where any question was okay. And then a few years later, there was another gathering. I had a bunch of nieces and nephews sitting in a circle, just chit-chatting, and my mother's in the kitchen, and we're talking, and she says, "Hey, isn't there that game isn't there a game you play?" And I'm like, she's like, "What, with people in a circle?" I'm like, "Oh, the hot seat." And she goes, "Yeah, that's it." And I was like, no, they don't need Uncle Marv to organize something here. So I let it go and went back. I sat with them, and I saw my mom again, like, wait a minute, maybe she was volunteering to be in the hot seat. And if my 90-year-old mother is volunteering to be in the hot seat with her grandchildren, then Uncle Marv will intervene, which I did. And it was amazing, Adrian. It was so beautiful. It was, and that was it. So it's, I mean, you know, the examples with my parents and grandchildren, that's pretty simple, you know, where you just go with curiosity, and I would, but there's room for caution, of course, with both families, you know, where indeed the best thing, it's not necessarily the right context to set up an activity like this, where being polite means asking whatever comes to mind.
What's the level of enthusiasm about relational mindfulness, this hot seat activity, among students, among your colleagues?
Yeah.
in the mindfulness community, so to speak?
It varies. It varies a lot. As I said before, it's not everyone's cup of tea, and so I have people, serious meditators with whom I've taught who aren't that excited about it, and so I'm very open to that question and to finding out more. I around me, people get infected, I guess, by my enthusiasm to some extent, but I really mean it in saying that I think it's potentially of great value, whether it's the hot seat or other sorts of, just dyad exercises or triads. There's different ways to set up the kind of the containers, in different prompts, and they can be they can be super playful and simple, and so, just even in the pandemic, doing a lot of teaching on Zoom, it's just having a space where people could talk honestly about what was happening. I mean, this is not complicated, but often we don't have it, because it's like, we don't want to burden our friends because we know they're going through stuff too. So we can be careful not to say things out of politeness, and so just to have a space where actually your job for 2 minutes is just talk about how life has been, and 2 or 3, so these are integrated into all of the mindfulness classes we teach one way or another. And I think it has a lot of potential, and even around political divisions, PTAs, just getting people, voluntary, getting them in a circle, just seeing each other as human beings rather than kind of, projecting on them a few things I think it has a lot of potential. And that being said, for me, they're pure fun. They're beautiful.
Yes. Well, gosh, plenty to discuss there, but I'm aware your time is limited. I think you have a class to get to. If people are interested to learn more about your work, where can they go? And also any recommendations as far as books or things along those lines for people who are interested in learning more about this?
So I am at the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center. And so we're easily found online. And we do
I'll include a link to it below in the description for the video.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks. And so we do offer, the basics of mindfulness. Our MAPS 1 class is a 6-week class, and we offer a lot of workshops and so forth. This summer, 2022, summer session A at UCLA, beginning June 22nd through the July, I'll be teaching an undergrad course on Zoom. But a lot of the activities that the students can go to for points are open to the public. And so anyone can go. And so
anyone from around like the
anywhere.
globe?
Okay. And on Thursday nights, beginning January 23rd, Tanzanite M. Sola will be leading relational mindfulness sessions at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And so this will be clearly advertised on our website, but this would be a great opportunity if someone's interested in relational mindfulness. Not she won't be facilitating hot seats there, but it will be just kind of more generic and beautiful and appropriate, introduction for people. And then there are a number of day-long retreats this summer. Diana Winston, my colleague, June 25th, Cara Lai on Sunday, July 17th, and Matthew Brensilver on July 23rd. So these, if anyone's interested in mindfulness or relational mindfulness, these, of course, are things I would highly recommend.
Okay, great. Well, this has been wonderful. It's really enjoyed speaking with you, and your enthusiasm is infectious. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for your interest. Thanks for reaching out. It's good to talk to you.
Likewise. Okay, bye for now.
Bye-bye.